The radar screen flickered with an anomaly that would change everything. At 3:47 hours on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other, Senior Airman Marcus Rivera stared at a blip that shouldn't exist. The contact appeared 30,000 feet above restricted airspace, moving at impossible speeds, broadcasting a signal that made his blood run cold. The code streaming across his monitor was Foxtrot 77 Alpha, a classification buried so deep in military archives that even mentioning it required clearance he didn't possess. Rivera's trembling fingers hovered over the communication panel. Protocol demanded he alert his commanding officer, but something about this transmission felt different, personal. The voice crackling through the static wasn't the mechanical drone of a test pilot or the clipped professionalism of a routine patrol. It carried weight, history, and an unmistakable authority that made seasoned officers straighten their spines without knowing why. Control, this is Phantom requesting immediate clearance for emergency landing procedures. The voice belonged to someone who had earned the right to demand attention, yet spoke with the careful restraint of someone who knew their words carried consequences. I have priority intelligence regarding Operation Nightfall. Authentication code Foxtrot 77 Alpha. The control tower erupted in controlled chaos. General Patricia Hawthorne, a woman whose reputation for composure under pressure was legendary, felt her coffee mug slip from suddenly nerveless fingers. The ceramic shattered against the floor, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the communication board, watching as decades of carefully buried secrets threatened to surface with each transmitted word. 3 floors below, in a bunker that officially didn't exist, classified files began automatically sealing as security protocols activated. Foxtrot 77 Alpha wasn't just retired, it was erased. The operation it represented had been struck from record, its participants sworn to silence, its very existence denied at the highest levels of government. Yet here it was, broadcast from the clouds by someone who clearly understood its significance. The aircraft itself defied easy categorization. Sleek lines suggested stealth technology, but the engine configuration belonged to no known military design. It moved with the fluid grace of advanced engineering married to exceptional piloting skill, each maneuver executed with precision that spoke of countless hours perfecting the impossible. As General Hawthorne reached for the red phone that connected directly to the Pentagon, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a breach of security, it was a reckoning. Someone from her past had returned, carrying secrets that could topple careers and rewrite history books. The only question was whether they came as friend or enemy, salvation or destruction. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, but in the control tower, darkness was falling. Whatever came next would test everything they thought they knew about loyalty, duty, and the price of keeping secrets. The voice on the radio belonged to someone who had paid that price before, and now they were calling in debts that had been accumulating interest for far too long. General Hawthorne's hand hovered over the secure communication line, her mind racing through possibilities that all led to the same impossible conclusion. The voice belonged to Captain Evelyn Ghost Thorne, a pilot who had been declared killed in action 8 years ago during a classified mission that officially never happened. The woman whose funeral Hawthorne had attended, whose medal she had presented to grieving parents, whose name was etched on a memorial wall that few were cleared to see. Yet here was Ghost's voice, crackling through the speakers with the same measured confidence that had once made her the most requested pilot for impossible missions. The irony of their shared surname had never been lost on either woman, 2 Thornes in the same unit, bound by profession rather than blood, yet closer than many sisters. Control, I'm declaring a military emergency and requesting immediate audience with General Patricia Hawthorne. The transmission carried undertones that only Hawthorne could interpret, the slight emphasis on her full name, the pause that suggested familiarity with protocol exceptions. I have information regarding hostile foreign acquisition of classified stealth technology. Rivera looked to his supervisor, who gestured helplessly toward the general. Nobody wanted to make this decision. Foxtrot 77 Alpha had been compartmentalized beyond standard classification levels, its details known only to a handful of individuals who had signed documents promising decades in federal prison for even acknowledging its existence. The aircraft continued its approach, defying radar attempts to get a solid lock. Whatever stealth modifications had been made were beyond anything in their current technological arsenal. It appeared as shadow and suggestion, there one moment and gone the next, like a ghost materializing from memory. Hawthorne finally lifted the red phone, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "This is General Hawthorne. I need immediate verification on the status of Operation Nightfall personnel." The pause stretched like eternity before the response came, a response that confirmed her worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. "Ma'am, Operation Nightfall files are sealed under executive order. Personnel records are classified beyond my clearance level." The aide's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who had learned not to ask questions that might have dangerous answers. Through the tower's reinforced windows, Hawthorne could see the aircraft beginning its final approach. Its landing gear deployed with mechanical precision, touching down on the runway with barely a whisper of tire against asphalt. The pilot's skill was undeniable. Only someone with Ghost's training could have managed such a flawless landing under these circumstances. Security teams were already surrounding the aircraft, their weapons trained on a cockpit they couldn't see through. The plane's dark hull reflected no light, seeming to absorb everything around it like a void in the shape of cutting-edge technology. Whoever had built this machine understood stealth in ways that went beyond mere radar evasion. The canopy began to open with a hydraulic hiss that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. What emerged would either validate 8 years of carefully maintained lies or shatter them entirely. General Hawthorne straightened her uniform, preparing to face a ghost who might hold the keys to secrets that could reshape the balance of global power. The figure that emerged from the cockpit moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to defying gravity. Even at a distance, General Hawthorne recognized the distinctive way Ghost carried herself, shoulders squared but relaxed, head held high with quiet confidence rather than arrogance. The flight suit was unfamiliar, matte black with no visible insignia, but the pilot's movements were unmistakably those of the woman who had once been considered the finest aviator in the Air Force. Security personnel maintained their positions, weapons trained but fingers off triggers. They had been briefed on the unusual nature of this situation, warned that standard protocols might not apply. The pilot raised both hands in a gesture of peaceful compliance, but there was something almost mocking about the submission, as if she were humoring children playing soldier. "Stand down, all units," Hawthorne's voice crackled through their earpieces. "I'll handle this personally." The order sent ripples of confusion through the security detail, but years of training overrode questions. They lowered their weapons but remained alert, forming a loose perimeter around the mysterious aircraft. Ghost removed her helmet with deliberate slowness, revealing features that had haunted Hawthorne's dreams for 8 years. The face was older, marked by lines that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, but the eyes remained unchanged, sharp, intelligent, carrying depths that suggested secrets within secrets. Her dark hair, longer than military regulations typically allowed, fell to her shoulders in waves that caught the morning light. "Hello, Patricia." The words carried across the tarmac with casual familiarity that made several security personnel shift uncomfortably. Nobody addressed the general by her first name except family and close friends from her academy days. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but circumstances required discretion." Hawthorne descended from the control tower, her stride measured and professional despite the emotional hurricane raging beneath her composed exterior. With each step, she cataloged the impossibilities. Ghost was alive, piloting technology that shouldn't exist, broadcasting codes that had been buried deeper than classified. The logical part of her mind insisted this was some elaborate deception, but her heart recognized truth in details too subtle to fake. The two women faced each other across 10 feet of concrete that might as well have been an ocean. 8 years of assumed death stretched between them, filled with memorial services, classified debriefings, and carefully crafted lies that had become institutional truth. The morning air carried the scent of jet fuel and possibility, both intoxicating and dangerous. "We buried you," Hawthorne said finally, her voice carrying the weight of genuine grief. "I spoke at your memorial service. I handed your parents a folded flag and looked them in the eyes while lying about how you died." Ghost's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I know. I watched the footage. Thank you for making it believable." The admission hung in the air like confession and accusation simultaneously. She had been alive, watching from somewhere in the shadows while the world mourned her passing. The aircraft behind her seemed to pulse with contained energy, its systems still active despite being powered down. Whatever technology drove it was beyond anything in their current arsenal, representing advances that could shift the balance of global power. The question was no longer whether Ghost had returned from the dead, but what she had brought back with her. The debriefing room had been swept for surveillance devices 3 times, its walls lined with material designed to block electronic eavesdropping. Still, General Hawthorne felt exposed as she sat across from a woman who had supposedly died defending classified secrets that now seemed to have followed her back from the grave. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that made both women appear older, wearier, marked by the weight of decisions that had shaped their separate paths. Ghost sat with the relaxed alertness of someone comfortable with being the most dangerous person in the room despite being technically unarmed. Her flight suit bore no rank insignia, no unit patches, no identifying marks that might hint at her allegiances over the past 8 years. She had become a blank slate, defined only by the secrets she carried and the aircraft that had delivered her back into their lives. "Operation Nightfall was supposed to end with your death," Hawthorne began, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone still trying to understand the full scope of what she was dealing with. "The prototype was destroyed, the technology buried, the research team scattered. We held funerals, Patricia. We grieved." The use of her first name, her real first name, not the call sign that had defined her military identity, seemed to hit Ghost like a physical blow. For a moment, the composed facade cracked, revealing glimpses of the woman who had once shared late-night conversations about dreams that extended beyond military service. "The prototype wasn't destroyed," Ghost replied, her voice steady but carrying undertones of exhaustion that suggested the weight of carrying secrets alone for nearly a decade. "It was stolen. Nightfall technology has been in foreign hands for 8 years, Patricia. Every stealth advancement we've celebrated, every tactical advantage we've assumed was ours. They've been ahead of us the entire time." The revelation hit Hawthorne like cold water. Operation Nightfall had been designed to develop next-generation stealth technology that would maintain American air superiority for decades. Its failure had been devastating enough, but the possibility that its secrets had been compromised represented a threat to national security that kept defense officials awake at night. "Who?" The single word carried the weight of command, demanding answers that might reshape strategic planning at the highest levels. Ghost leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Hawthorne's face. "The same people who arranged my death, the same people who have been feeding intelligence to foreign powers for 15 years, the same people who are about to sell Nightfall derivatives to the highest bidder unless we stop them." The implications were staggering. If Ghost was telling the truth, then Operation Nightfall hadn't been a failure, it had been sabotage. The deaths of 12 personnel, the destruction of billions in research, the careful burial of technologies that could have revolutionized warfare, all of it had been orchestrated to cover tracks that led to the highest levels of military leadership. "You've been tracking them," Hawthorne said. It wasn't a question. Ghost's survival, her access to advanced aircraft, her knowledge of current intelligence operations, all of it pointed to 8 years spent hunting shadows while the world believed her dead. "I've been preparing." Ghost's smile held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of someone who had spent years planning for this moment. And now it's time to finish what Nightfall was supposed to accomplish, permanently. The classified briefing files spread across the conference table told a story of betrayal that reached into the highest echelons of military command. Satellite photographs, intercepted communications, financial records that traced money through offshore accounts. Ghost had assembled a case that would have impressed federal investigators if they could have been trusted with its contents. General Hawthorne studied each document with growing horror and admiration. The evidence was meticulous, professionally gathered, and absolutely damning. For 8 years, while presumed dead, Ghost had been conducting a one-woman intelligence operation that put entire agencies to shame. "Colonel Marcus Vance," Ghost said, sliding a photograph across the table. The image showed a distinguished man in Air Force dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that spoke of distinguished service. Joint Chiefs Liaison for Advanced Weapons Development, also the highest-placed foreign asset in the Pentagon. Hawthorne knew Vance personally, had worked with him on multiple classified projects, had trusted him with secrets that could cripple national security if revealed. The accusation felt like betrayal layered upon betrayal, each revelation making her question decades of professional relationships. "You're certain?" The question carried desperate hope for denial, for some explanation that would preserve faith in the institution they had both served with distinction. Ghost opened a laptop that bore no manufacturer's markings, its screen displaying encrypted communications that painted a clear picture of treason. Vance orchestrated Nightfall's failure to cover his theft of the technology. He arranged the accident that was supposed to kill me, then spent 8 years selling our secrets to foreign powers while climbing the ranks of military leadership. The communications were damning, coded messages that outlined technology transfers, payment schedules, and operational details that could only have come from someone with access to the most classified military research. Vance had been playing a long game, positioning himself to maximize the value of stolen secrets while maintaining his cover as a loyal officer. "He's planning something big," Ghost continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years piecing together fragments of intelligence. "A public demonstration of Nightfall-derived technology that will humiliate American air power while establishing new buyers for his services." Hawthorne felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders like lead. The decision she made in the next few minutes would determine whether 8 years of betrayal could be exposed and stopped, or whether Ghost's return would simply add another body to Vance's trail of destruction. "What do you need?" The question committed her to a path that would either save national security or destroy her career. There was no middle ground when dealing with treason at this level. Ghost's smile was the first genuine expression Hawthorne had seen since her return. "I need you to trust me one more time, and I need access to the aircraft that brought me here. It's going to take something they've never seen before to stop what Vance has planned." The morning sun streamed through reinforced windows that offered no view of the aircraft sitting on the runway. But both women could feel its presence like a promise of possibilities that existed beyond conventional warfare. The secure hangar buzzed with activity as technicians swarmed over Ghost's aircraft like archaeologists examining an impossible artifact. The machine defied conventional understanding. Its hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its engine configuration suggested power sources that belonged more to science fiction than military reality. Chief Technical Sergeant Maria Santos whistled softly as she ran diagnostic equipment over surfaces that registered as both present and absent depending on the angle of measurement. Ma'am, this isn't just stealth technology, Santos reported to General Hawthorne. This is something entirely new. The radar signature is essentially non-existent, but that's not the interesting part. The power readings suggest an energy source that shouldn't be possible with current materials science. Ghost watched the examination with the detached interest of someone who had lived with impossible technology for years. She had changed from her flight suit into military fatigues that bore no insignia, but her bearing suggested someone accustomed to command despite the absence of visible rank. The aircraft isn't the weapon, Ghost explained, her voice carrying across the hangar with quiet authority. It's the delivery system. What Vance stole from Nightfall wasn't just stealth technology. It was the theoretical framework for manipulating electromagnetic signatures in ways that could revolutionize warfare. Hawthorne studied the readouts that Santos provided, trying to comprehend implications that stretched beyond her technical expertise. You're saying he has the ability to neutralize our entire air defense network. I'm saying he has the ability to make our most advanced aircraft appear primitive by comparison. Ghost moved to the aircraft's nose, running her hand along surfaces that seemed to shift and change under her touch. But more importantly, I know how to stop him. The plan Ghost outlined was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Vance had scheduled a demonstration for potential buyers, a show of force that would occur during international war games, where the theft of American technology could be displayed as foreign innovation. The timing was perfect for maximum humiliation and minimum attribution. He'll be flying the original Nightfall prototype, Ghost continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had spent years planning for this moment. The aircraft he stole 8 years ago, upgraded with improvements funded by selling our secrets. He thinks he's untouchable because nobody knows the technology exists. The hangar fell silent except for the hum of diagnostic equipment and the distant sound of normal base operations continuing outside their bubble of classified reality. What Ghost was proposing went beyond military engagement. It was personal combat between two pilots who represented opposing sides of the same terrible equation. You want to take him on directly, Hawthorne said. It wasn't a question. The tactical situation demanded surgical precision that only Ghost's combination of skill and intimate knowledge of the stolen technology could provide. Ghost nodded, her expression carrying the weight of 8 years spent preparing for this confrontation. I want to finish what Nightfall was supposed to accomplish, and I want to do it in a way that ensures he can never sell our secrets again. The morning light streaming through the hangar's high windows caught the aircraft's hull in ways that made it seem to phase in and out of existence, a fitting metaphor for the pilot who had returned from the dead to settle accounts that had been accumulating interest for far too long. The briefing room filled with officers whose security clearances granted them access to secrets that could topple governments. Yet what they heard from Ghost pushed the boundaries of even their elevated understanding. Colonel James Mitchell, head of Special Operations, sat with the rigid posture of someone trying to process information that challenged fundamental assumptions about military capability. The demonstration is scheduled for 1400 hours tomorrow, Ghost explained, pointing to satellite imagery that showed the designated airspace over international waters. Vance will be conducting aerial maneuvers designed to showcase technology that appears to be foreign innovation, but is actually stolen American research. The assembled officers studied tactical displays that showed positioning of Allied and neutral observers, foreign military attachés, who would witness what they believed to be a demonstration of superior enemy capabilities. The psychological impact would be devastating. America's allies would question their dependence on what appeared to be obsolete technology. Intelligence suggests at least 12 potential buyers will be monitoring the demonstration, Colonel Mitchell added, his voice carrying the grim satisfaction of someone who specialized in impossible missions. If Vance succeeds, We'll be facing Nightfall-derived technology in conflicts around the world within 6 months. Ghost activated her laptop, displaying flight patterns that revealed the scope of Vance's ambitions. He's not just selling technology, he's selling the illusion of American vulnerability. Every potential adversary watching tomorrow will believe they can match our air superiority with equipment purchased from a trader. General Hawthorne studied the mission parameters with the eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating impossible odds. What you're proposing is essentially single-pilot air-to-air combat, using experimental aircraft against an enemy who knows our capabilities intimately. The tactical challenge was staggering. Vance had access to the original Nightfall prototype, plus 8 years of improvements funded by selling American secrets. He would be expecting interference, prepared for conventional military response, and operating in international airspace where aggressive action could trigger diplomatic incidents. "He won't be expecting me," Ghost said simply. Her confidence was absolute, carrying the weight of someone who had spent years analyzing every aspect of the coming confrontation. "As far as official records show, I'm dead. The aircraft I'll be flying doesn't exist in any database he has access to." The silence stretched as career military officers contemplated sanctioning an operation that existed in the gray areas between justice and revenge. What Ghost proposed was technically feasible but politically explosive. A dead pilot flying a non-existent aircraft to stop a trader from selling secrets that officially had never been stolen. "We'll need to maintain plausible deniability," Hawthorne said finally, her words carrying the weight of command decisions that would be analyzed by historians if they went wrong. "This operation cannot be traced back to official channels." Ghost smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone who had been operating without official backing for 8 years. "General, I've been maintaining plausible deniability since the day you buried me. Tomorrow, I'm just going to extend that courtesy to Colonel Vance." The briefing concluded with handshakes that felt like final farewells and mission authorizations that would never appear in official records. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Ghost like an old friend as she conducted her final systems check. The aircraft hummed with barely contained energy, its instruments displaying readings that defied conventional understanding of aerodynamics and power generation. 8 years of careful modification had transformed Nightfall's derivative technology into something that approached the theoretical limits of atmospheric flight. General Hawthorne stood beside the cockpit, her expression mixing professional concern with personal anguish. "Evelyn," the use of her first name rather than her call sign carried the weight of friendship that transcended military protocol. "You don't have to do this alone." Ghost paused in her preparations, her hands stilling on controls that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Yes, I do. This isn't about military justice or national security, not entirely. It's about finishing something I started 8 years ago when I chose to let the world believe I was dead." The conversation carried undertones of decisions that had isolated Ghost from everything she had once held dear: family, friends, the comfortable certainties of military service. Her choice to remain hidden had been tactically sound but emotionally devastating, cutting her off from human connections that might have sustained her through years of solitary hunting. "When this is over," Hawthorne said carefully, "what then? You can't stay dead forever." The question hung in the pre-dawn air like a challenge to consider futures that extended beyond the immediate mission. Ghost had spent so long focused on stopping Vance that she had avoided thinking about what came after, whether redemption was possible for someone who had chosen to exist in the shadows for 8 years. "I'll figure that out after I ensure there is an after," Ghost replied, her voice carrying determination that masked deeper uncertainties. She sealed the cockpit with movements that spoke of ritual and finality, preparing for a confrontation that would either validate 8 years of sacrifice or make them meaningless. The aircraft's engines spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, their output carefully modulated to avoid detection by monitoring stations that tracked conventional military movements. Ghost had learned to think in terms of electromagnetic signatures and radar shadows, becoming one with technology that blurred the lines between pilot and machine. As she taxied toward the runway, Ghost's radio crackled with final communications from the control tower. "Ghost, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." The transmission carried genuine emotion, recognition that what launched in the darkness might never return, taking with it secrets that could reshape understanding of what was possible in the realm of military aviation. The aircraft lifted off with supernatural grace, disappearing into darkness that seemed to welcome it like a long-lost child. General Hawthorne watched until even the exhaust signature faded, leaving only the sound of distant engines and the weight of decisions that would define careers and potentially nations. Above, Ghost climbed toward an altitude where the coming confrontation would play out beyond the reach of conventional witnesses, carrying with her the hopes of those who had chosen to trust in the skills of a pilot who had returned from the dead to settle accounts written in betrayal and technological theft. The international airspace stretched endlessly below, as Ghost maintained altitude and course toward coordinates that had been burned into her memory for months of planning. Her aircraft moved through the sky like a whisper of possibility, its stealth characteristics rendering it invisible to conventional radar, while she monitored communications traffic that revealed the growing anticipation among those gathered to witness Vance's demonstration. Below, naval vessels from multiple nations had positioned themselves to observe what they believed would be a revelation of foreign technological superiority. Intelligence gathered over years of careful surveillance had identified the attendees, arms dealers, foreign military attachés, and shadowy figures whose funding could shift the balance of global conflicts. "Control, this is Nightfall Prototype requesting clearance for demonstration patterns." Vance's voice carried across military communication channels with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. His aircraft had appeared on radar like a revelation, its signature suggesting technology that exceeded anything in the acknowledged American arsenal. Ghost smiled grimly as she listened to the casual arrogance in his transmission. For 8 years, Vance had operated under the assumption that the only witness to his betrayal was dead, buried with full military honors while he climbed the ranks of military leadership. Today, that assumption would be tested in the most direct way possible. The stolen Nightfall prototype was impressive. Ghost had to admit that Vance and his foreign partners had made significant improvements to the original design. Its radar signature flickered in and out of existence with a sophistication that suggested access to research that should have been compartmentalized beyond any single individual's reach. Unknown aircraft, you are entering restricted airspace for military demonstration. The challenge came from a naval vessel monitoring the exercise, its radar operators struggling to maintain locks on targets that seemed to exist more as theoretical possibilities than solid objects. Ghost checked her weapons systems with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. The aircraft carried armaments that officially didn't exist, derived from the same theoretical framework that made the stealth technology possible. What she was about to attempt would either validate 8 years of sacrifice or serve as her actual funeral. "Nightfall prototype, be advised you have company," came a transmission from one of the monitoring stations. "Unknown contact bearing 090, altitude Angels 30. Vance's response carried the first hint of uncertainty she had heard in his voice. "Control, please clarify unknown contact. This airspace was supposed to be clear of American assets." Ghost activated her communication system, broadcasting on frequencies that she knew Vance would recognize from their shared past. "Hello, Marcus, miss me?" The silence that followed carried the weight of 8 years of carefully constructed lies crumbling in the space of 3 words. Below, Monitoring stations erupted in confusion as operators tried to process the appearance of an aircraft that shouldn't exist, piloted by someone who was supposed to be dead. The dance of death was about to begin at 30,000 feet, witnessed by those who would never fully understand what they were seeing. The dogfight began not with explosive violence, but with a careful circling that spoke of two pilots intimately familiar with each other's capabilities. Vance had recovered from his initial shock with professional speed, his stolen prototype maneuvering with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years mastering its capabilities. But Ghost had advantages he couldn't anticipate. 8 years of analyzing his flying patterns through intercepted training records and surveillance footage. "You always were too clever for your own good, Evelyn," Vance's voice crackled through encrypted communications, carrying a mixture of admiration and lethal intent. "I should have made sure of your death personally instead of trusting it to foreign operatives." The admission confirmed what Ghost had suspected but never proven, that her supposed death had been arranged assassination rather than mission failure. The knowledge brought no satisfaction, only the cold clarity of someone whose suspicions had been validated in the worst possible way. "You made two mistakes, Marcus," Ghost replied, rolling her aircraft into a climbing turn that utilized atmospheric physics in ways that pushed the boundaries of aerodynamic possibility. "First, you assumed I was dead. Second, you assumed I'd been working alone." The lie was calculated to introduce uncertainty into Vance's tactical thinking. In reality, Ghost had been operating as a single-person intelligence unit for 8 years, but the suggestion of backup support might make him more cautious, more prone to mistakes that could provide tactical advantage. Their aircraft danced through the sky in patterns that resembled lethal ballet, each pilot testing the other's capabilities while maintaining enough distance to avoid immediate engagement. The stolen prototype was impressive, but Ghost's aircraft incorporated improvements that reflected 8 years of dedicated development focused on a single target. Below them, naval observers struggled to track combat that flickered in and out of radar coverage like a fever dream of aerial warfare. The demonstration that was supposed to showcase foreign technological superiority had transformed into something far more mysterious, a battle between ghosts that challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible in atmospheric flight. "You can't win this, Evelyn," Vance said, his aircraft beginning to close distance in preparation for weapons engagement. "Even if you kill me, the technology is already in foreign hands. Nightfall derivatives are being manufactured in facilities across 3 continents." Ghost's response came not in words, but in maneuvers that demonstrated capabilities Vance hadn't anticipated. Her aircraft seemed to bend physics, pulling turns that should have been impossible without structural failure, accelerating in ways that suggested power sources beyond conventional jet propulsion. "The difference between us, Marcus," she transmitted as her weapons systems achieved lock, "is that I've had 8 years to perfect this aircraft specifically for killing you. You've been trying to sell secrets while I've been learning to weaponize them." The engagement phase was about to begin, and with it, the resolution of betrayals that had shaped both their lives for nearly a decade. Below, observers prepared to witness aerial combat that would redefine their understanding of what was possible when cutting-edge technology met perfect pilot skill. The first exchange of fire occurred at ranges that pushed the limits of air-to-air engagement, both pilots utilizing weapon systems that existed in the theoretical spaces between acknowledged military capability and science fiction. Ghost's aircraft shuddered as proximity-fused projectiles detonated close enough to register on damage control systems, but the advanced shielding held against attacks that would have destroyed conventional fighters. Vance's prototype proved equally resilient, its hull deflecting energy weapons that Ghost had spent years perfecting. The battle was not just between pilots, but between competing interpretations of the same stolen technology, each representing different approaches to the problem of making aircraft survive in increasingly hostile environments. Impressive modifications, Vance acknowledged, his aircraft rolling through evasive maneuvers that showcased years of practice with the stolen prototype. But you're still fighting with jury-rigged improvements while I have access to production-level refinements funded by very interested buyers. The taunt carried undertones of financial resources that Ghost couldn't match. Foreign governments and private military contractors who had funded 8 years of development in exchange for access to technology that could revolutionize aerial warfare. Vance had turned betrayal into a business model, selling American secrets to the highest bidders while climbing the ranks of military leadership. Ghost's response came in the form of maneuvers that utilized atmospheric physics in ways that challenged conventional understanding of flight dynamics. Her aircraft seemed to slide sideways through the air, presenting targeting solutions that existed for microseconds before disappearing into impossibility. "Money buys you improvements, Marcus," she transmitted while lining up for another attack run. "But it doesn't buy you the one thing I've had 8 years to develop, personal motivation to see you die." The psychological warfare was as important as the technological. Both pilots were pushing their aircraft and themselves to the absolute limits of capability, but Ghost carried the additional fuel of 8 years spent planning for this specific confrontation. Every maneuver had been rehearsed, every tactical scenario analyzed and prepared for. Below them, the naval observers had given up trying to track the engagement in real time. Their radar screens showed ghostly contacts that appeared and disappeared like electronic hallucinations, occasionally punctuated by energy discharges that registered as atmospheric disturbances rather than weapons fire. The battle began to shift as Ghost's superior knowledge of Vance's flying patterns started to provide tactical advantage. She anticipated his maneuvers with uncanny accuracy, positioning her aircraft to exploit split-second windows of vulnerability that existed only because she had studied his techniques with obsessive dedication. "You can't sustain this forever, Evelyn," Vance warned, his aircraft showing signs of stress from maneuvers that pushed beyond design limitations. "Even if you win, you'll never be able to return to the life you had. They'll bury you again, deeper this time." The words carried truth that Ghost had been avoiding for 8 years, that her choice to remain dead had cut her off from redemption, as surely as it had enabled her mission of vengeance. The decisive moment came not through superior firepower, but through a tactical gambit that utilized Ghost's intimate knowledge of the original Nightfall prototype specifications. As Vance attempted a high-energy turn that should have provided escape vector, Ghost anticipated the maneuver and positioned herself to exploit a structural weakness that existed only in the original design, a vulnerability that had been corrected in her aircraft but remained in the stolen prototype. "Impossible," Vance breathed as his aircraft began to experience system failures that cascaded through multiple redundant backup systems. "You can't know about the resonance frequency vulnerability that was classified beyond your clearance level." Ghost's smile was invisible inside her helmet, but her voice carried the satisfaction of someone whose years of careful planning had finally reached fruition. "I know about it because I helped design the fix 8 years ago, before you had me killed. The question is whether you've had time to implement the corrections." The answer became clear as Vance's prototype began to exhibit control instabilities that no amount of pilot skill could compensate for. The resonance frequency that Ghost had triggered through precise manipulation of her aircraft's electromagnetic signature was causing molecular-level vibrations in the stolen prototype's hull structure. "You're going to kill us both," Vance warned, his aircraft beginning to shed components as structural integrity failed in progressive cascade. "The technology will die with us." "No," Ghost replied, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had accepted the full cost of her mission years ago. "The technology will die with you. I've made sure of that." The stolen prototype began its final descent toward the ocean surface, trailing debris that would puzzle forensic investigators for decades. But Vance wasn't finished. As his aircraft fell, he activated a dead man's switch that would broadcast the complete Nightfall technical specifications to every receiver within transmission range. Ghost had anticipated this final act of betrayal. Her aircraft's jamming systems engaged with power levels that bordered on the theoretical maximum, creating an electromagnetic interference pattern that turned Vance's transmission into unintelligible static. The secrets,